So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome the co-founders of Zealyst. Yeah, kind of a Beyonce introduction. Are we good, Greg, on the sound?
I gotta have to quiet down a little bit.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So, I'm glad you got the wine.
It's a fireside chat.
It's a fireside chat. Well, again, for those of you who haven't been to Startup Grind, this is truly a conversation between three people. So it is really just me asking questions from an entrepreneur standpoint. And some of these questions I've been sent via email from some people in the audience. So, again, feel free to ask those questions, hold those to the end. But it really is a conversation between the three of us. So, again, thank you for being here.
We're happy to be here.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm sorry you only have one mic, but actually it's probably better that you here. You got lots of cords.
We're really good at sharing. We've practiced over the years.
Okay, good. So tell us just some things. I don't really want to, ask questions like, where'd you grow up? That's not really that important. It's more like, why'd you do that? So tell us just in a really short kind of synopsis why you started. I mean, you're young. You weren't in the corporate world for 10 years.
Right.
You were in the corporate world for 10 months, maybe. So tell us why it started. How did you guys meet, and then how did it start?
Do you want me to start?
Go for it. So I would say our naivete was a great asset in the beginning because we had no idea what we were getting into. And Britta and I met over 6 years ago now when we were working at a nonprofit, and it was both of our first sort of real jobs out of college, and we became fast friends there, and afterward moved on to startups separately, different startups. And that was really where we caught the bug. And about a year and a half into that stage, I went to Vermont to visit my younger sister, and Britta and I had been talking about ideas we wanted to work on. It was kind of a fantasy. I think around that time we saw Social Network, and we're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. We could do that. But I was in Vermont and visited the Ben & Jerry's factory and heard the story of Ben & Jerry. And the story is basically that they were two friends in their mid-20s who had jobs, had things going on, but wanted to do something together and wanted to build something together. And they liked bagels and ice cream, and bagel makers were too expensive. And it was as simple as that. They started making ice cream. And it clicked in that moment that we didn't need to have the perfect idea. We didn't need to have everything figured out. We just needed to start building. And so Britta picked me up from the airport, and I said, I'm dropping off my bags, and we're going to figure it out today. And we went for a walk, and we walked 14 miles that day around Seattle, and had the idea we wanted to work on by the time we got back. And that truly is, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but that truly is how we started. We just one day decided we need to start working on this. And we didn't quit our jobs right away. Yeah. So we took our time with that.
Yeah.
I would just add that the economic state of the world at that time when we took that walk also really...
Yeah, because what year was that? 2000?
That would be 2009.
10.
We met in 2008.
Yeah.
We took the walk in 2010. But there was mad recession going on.
Yes.
There were not a whole lot of really exciting opportunities for folks like us with liberal arts backgrounds and who wanted to do something really cool and really great right now. So we made it for ourselves.
Sure.
And I think that's a big part of our story was that while the recession was really crummy in a lot of ways, I think it really created the space for us to, at least for me, to feel like it was the right thing for me to do with my time and my energy, and really focus on building something from scratch.
Sure. So, Britta, why don't you answer this? So, what has been your biggest learning thing in the last 3 years? And I'm just talking about the last 3 years because there's tons of stuff I'm sure early on. But in the last 3 years, what has Britta learned? Like, holy crap, this I just didn't think I would, get through this, and I learned X, Y, Z. Can you name one thing that was really a kind of a big deal for you?
I hope you don't see this as a cop-out, but it's to be amazed every day and to be humbled every day and to learn something new every day, because I think the last 3 years have brought so much change and so much growth and so many opportunities for us to meet new people and to build new things and to stretch the way we think and imagine the impact that we can have on our world. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is not to get attached to any one vision, to any one plan, but really to stay attached to the emotion behind it and not get too bogged down in the execution of, oh, it's day 1, day 20, I am sure I will be right here, because by day 20, it will be day 1 again. Yeah. And that keeps it really exciting. And it took me a while to wrap my mind around that. But it's an interesting path, an interesting life that we have chosen. Not necessarily an easy one, but it is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's what startups are about, right?
Yes.
Never a dull moment. So Martina, for you, a similar question. What have you learned on how to manage the business? Like, as a business, what have you learned? Like, what's been your thing that you're like, I learned this X in managing the business, so I'm kind of trying to get more into the business side of things from you.
Well, I think in a similar vein, I would say one of the mistakes I learned from early on was that we thought things would happen the way we expected them to, and we resisted some evidence and some indications that that wasn't the case for too long, and we could have adapted and grown more quickly had we not had that resistance. And so now, especially now that our team is growing and there are more ideas, there's more energy in the mix, I try really, really hard to maintain an open mind and put my ego aside, because every day I am wrong about a lot of things, and I just have had to learn to embrace that rather than fight it, and also to know the moments when I do need to hold my ground. And I think that's the balance, I'm continuing to always refine and continue to learn, but where do I need to stay true to whatever that north is and keep the team focused on that, but also knowing that a lot of the time my assumptions are going to be wrong and will be better and stronger for me and then by extension the team and kind of our philosophy, being able to recognize that and learn from that.
And who has helped you, in your opinion, the most?
Ooh, with just one person?
Yeah.
Well, there are a set of mentors. One is not here tonight, but I will say his name because he's been probably the one who's pushed us the most. So one of our advisors, Jiga Shavalani, is just fantastic. And I would say he called us on BS from day one and really, really pushed us and continues to, and really cuts to the core in a way that very few people in my life do. So when I reach any kind of impasse, I usually call Jigish, not for comfort and love, because that's not what he gives me usually.
You're not going to get any of that. Yeah.
But for some straight talk.
Yeah. And have you or are you mentoring anyone else? Either one of you guys mentoring anyone else?
We developed a policy pretty early on of take the meeting. And that happened because in our early days when we were really starry-eyed, and we reached out to a ton of people, and just about everybody said, sure, I'll sit down with you for a cup of coffee and I will listen to your ideas and I will ask you tough questions. And so that is something that is really important to me to give back, especially when I encounter young women founders or women who want to start a business with their best friend like we did. Like that, I've got a lot of experience with that, and I think it's one of the best things I've done in my life, and I want to encourage other people to do it.
Sure.
And I think when we were starting out, knowing that we weren't the only ones who ever encountered this problem or that problem, or realized our monetization strategy needed to change, or anything else, knowing that we weren't the only people who had ever been in that situation was a huge comfort to me. So I try to spread that out as much as I can. Since we've gotten a little farther away from our early days, it's not, our calendars are more packed, but I still try to take the meeting. If people will reach out to me, I still very much try to talk to them and listen to them and answer their questions and ask them tough questions and follow up a few months later. Hey, are you still doing it?
Because sometimes they aren't.
Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes, there are two women I know who are trying to start a business, and I follow up with them every quarter, and I ask, are you still doing it? And they say, well, I'm so glad you wrote, because I've been working on this problem, and I would love to hear your feedback on this. And then, those little pushes were so helpful for us in the beginning. I very much tried to pay that forward.
Yeah. So let's talk about partners, best friends, co-founders. It's hard. I mean, it's hard.
We're tight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, obviously. So let's go. Look, what's the last argument you had?
Oh. Do you remember that?
Where
this was?
On our way here. I said, no, it's at the Wells Fargo building. No, it's none of that.
Okay, so let's get another one. What was the last meaningful argument you had, and how was it? How was it? Frame it for us, and then how was it solved?
Sure. So I would actually say, in all honesty, and this isn't to gloss over, kind of, not to sugarcoat anything, but I would say we rarely argue. However, we do have moments of high tension and difficult communication, because neither of us are really kind of the shout, battle it out kind of people. So our arguments don't look like what you might expect an argument to look like. But the last big one, I was not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, we had a fairly big shift in the direction for the company. And it's all worked out really well, but I think whenever those moments happen, where there's a big change that happens pretty suddenly,
Sure.
There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of different perspectives on how that decision's made, and we've made a commitment since the very beginning, before we even had any team around us, that we needed to address those moments of tension head on before they became insidious and much, much bigger than they needed to be. So
let me just stop you right there. So learning, this is a learning event. That is a learning thing right there. When you co-founders, when you have an issue, fix it immediately, because it boils over or boils too long, it gets really ugly. I mean, I can attest to that many times. So that is, I just wanted to say that because it's really important that everyone understands that.
And it's really hard. It's really, really hard to do. In this particular instance, we've gotten it down to a pretty good rhythm now, but I waited probably 24 hours longer than I should have to bring up a conversation of something that was bothering me, that it just got bigger than it needed to be in that 24 hours. And we ended up getting through it pretty quickly, but whenever you let that emotion build and whenever you let that fester, it makes it so much more difficult than it needs to be. And so, we really trust each other and know that, although Britta just told me she has secret fears about me just quitting the company publicly, so I'm not gonna quit tonight if that's but we know that's not gonna happen. We trust one another to get through those moments, and so it makes it easier to approach the difficult moments.
Did you structure anything when you started out? Like, did you talk about, like, hey, when we have a big decision, we should do X. Was that?
Yeah, to some degree. I wouldn't say we did as much as we should have, but we actually had a third co-founder when we started as well. And so amongst the three of us, we made kind of a charter and a plan for communication. And actually, it served us very well when our third co-founder left, because we actually had a plan for what would happen in the event of one of us bowing out. And it happened really gracefully, and we're all still friends. And now that it's the two of us, I think we've continued to refine that, and actually new challenges have come up to surprise us along the way. So every time we think we've got it and we're totally on top of it, some surprise comes along that knocks us down a little bit again. And just recently we actually had to start scheduling one-on-ones with each other. We've never done that before, but it's got to the point where that wasn't happening naturally anymore. We used to just spend all our time together, and we still do, but usually now there are other people around, there's activity, we don't get as much one-on-one time, and so we've actually started putting that on the calendar, and that's just within the last couple months. So it's always evolving, the tactics and strategies that we employ, but fundamentally it's about just making sure that we're communicating both about the business and about what's going on personally, because that very much impacts how we make decisions and the energy we bring to our work.
And so I know some of the inner stories, right? So tell us, the audience, what made you determine the big pivot you did 2 years ago or so? Tell us.
There were two big ones.
Yeah, I know. The first big one.
The first big one.
Yeah, tell us how that came about, and just tell us that.
I think the first big pivot was brought on by opportunity, and the second big pivot was more
desperation.
Realizing what we were doing wasn't working.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who aren't familiar with what Zealyst is or what Zealyst was, on that long walk, Martina and I talked about what we loved and what we did well and where we saw market opportunity, and it all kept coming back to people and introductions, really good, and introducing people who wouldn't have met but needed to meet and needed the right push to have the conversation to take their relationship into the next level, whether it was two people who wanted to run a marathon together and never knew that other person also had that interest, or we had a marriage result from one of our first events, fourth event, they got married. And so we were using games and data analysis to connect people in event settings that we called huddles. And we had a really great group of people who came to those huddles. A handful of them are here today, which is wonderful. And those members of Zealyst in the early phase were really devoted and loyal and invited us to bring what we had developed, this strategic matching and games to help facilitate conversation, into the organizations where they volunteered and worked. And so it was through our members that we were invited to work with the University of Washington and a handful of nonprofits. And when we were invited to work with Amazon, we realized, oh shoot, this is a really big opportunity. And we had been going into doing these events before thinking, we've seen startups fail because they get distracted. We don't want to get distracted, so we'll do this because these members are really important to us.
Just this one time.
Yeah, just this one time. And then we saw our games being played by Amazonians and saw the connections being made and saw this really beautiful humanity happening because of what we built, and realized this is not a distraction, this is a direction. And so that's what brought on the first pivot.
Yeah. And was there 100% agreement between the two of you?
I think it took time for both of us to fully embrace it, because there was some mourning our original vision was that we wanted to take a consumer route and reach a really broad spectrum of people all over, and have these huddles happening in cities, and a very kind of grassroots thing. And for different reasons, but in the same vein, we both just went through a period of letting go of that. But we were both on board with, by the time the Amazon huddle came around, we both knew that was the best direction for the business. And then there was just sort of the transition to work through and to get the team at that time on board with the new direction. But I don't think there was any fundamental disagreement that was the way we should go. I always joke that after opportunity knocked and knocked and knocked and then banged on the door, Father, like, oh, okay. So by that time we were ready for it.
Yeah. And so again, describe the second big one.
I think that the second pivot, and I've had a handful of conversations with other founders about the really dark time that precedes a pivot. And at first it's a few things that aren't working out, that someone won't call you back, or they keep blowing you off. And then more of that happens where you can't get the client deals and your conversations go cold. And then I started blaming everybody else. Oh, well, they just don't know. They're not forward thinking enough to realize that
This is the greatest thing since the wheel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's my job to think that it's the greatest thing since the wheel. And I believe that what we've built is the greatest thing since the wheel. But I wasn't listening to everybody else, and I wasn't experiencing the rest of the world. And so it was a while of being in that space before we realized, or even talked about in earnest, what if we cut out the live piece? What if we did that? And I think we had to get pretty far down to the bottom before that was something that we were really willing to consider, because it was such a big part of our initial vision.
Yeah. Because that's what it was.
You can talk about the retreat.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add to that I think what compounded that even more than just kind of an attachment to the vision was there was a period of time where it was pretty glamorous and exciting. I mean, we started flying around the country doing these things for corporations. We were making a decent amount of money, and it was exciting, and it was really cool to see it take on that kind of life. But yeah, we went on a retreat in late 2013 and had this. We just reconciled that it wasn't what we actually wanted to create, and it wasn't. There were problems with what clients were saying and sort of what we wanted. You know, it didn't quite fit together, and it wasn't ultimately the business we wanted to create. It was a very different direction, a very different set of possibilities facing us that didn't excite us anymore, and so it took a while. And again, I just think back to, I wish I would have realized it sooner, but it is what it is, and I think you have to learn in the way that you experience it. But in retrospect, I think that glamorous allure, we got caught up in that, and it masked a lot of the things that weren't working.
Sure. Yeah, it was sexy for a while.
Yeah.
So talk about the experience of that period of time, not having money and not knowing where you're going to get money.
Yeah. So that was tough. I'd say so. One of the things that was crazy about that time is we suddenly realized there really are no rules, because we got to this point where every kind of logical assumption would be just give up. You know, this is the end. Come on, just accept it. And that's actually, so we went to one of our board members' cabins on Whidbey Island to kind of have that conversation. We locked ourselves in a cabin and said, is this the end, basically? And reassessed everything that we'd experienced, that we're feeling, and came to a few interesting conclusions. And one was that we were hearing that clients really loved what we were doing, but wanted something more scalable and sustainable. And that's one of the things we resisted, because it didn't quite fit into the paradigm that we imagined. And so we started talking about what would that look like? If we just let go of our own resistance to that, what would that look like? And we started for the first time imagining that. And that's what led to what Zealyst is today. And the other thing that happened was we were really honest with each other about how unhappy we were. We were both really unhappy at that time. And Britta said at one point, I'd really like to get married eventually. She'd been with her boyfriend at the time for 6 or 7 years. And I said, yeah, I'd really like to go on a date. Like, we'd really like to have a life at some point. And have,
Marriage?
Yeah. And so we were honest about things that fundamentally weren't working on the business side and also weren't working in our lives. And speaking that aloud to one another was kind of scary because I think both of us had been afraid to admit that. We didn't want to seem weak. We didn't want to seem like our commitment was lacking. But once we had that conversation, we could talk about what we wanted to create instead, both in terms of the business and in terms of how we structured our lives.
I think the other big heart-to-heart that we had on that retreat was we turned to each other and asked, do you still have it in you? Do you want to keep doing this? Do you have enough to figure out how to make this work? And we were both very open and very willing for the other one to say no. I might have been secretly hoping that she said, nope, I'm tired, I'm done, it's time to get a paycheck.
I'm sure both of you,
some glory.
At some point of your body, both of you were like saying, I hope she says no, we're done.
But neither of us did. Both of us said, let's keep doing it. Let's figure out a way to make this work. Let's be open to things that we weren't before. And I think all of that was really important in getting us to where we are now.
So in that time, what were the things that what were the things that made it work? Like, I'm trying to find the thing that I could share with someone that said, I did these 2 things that really helped us kind of get over the hump. Describe maybe some of the raising money challenges you had, because I know there were plenty. So
I'm going to let you take that one. One of my tangible suggestions for anyone starting a business, I think especially women, and it's especially important to have these in place before you hit the bottom or start circling the bottom, is find people in your life who value you for things outside of your business. Because it was so easy, and we totally let our identities wrap themselves around this zebra-striped business that we had started. And it was around that time that I realized that was one of the things that was making me so unhappy, was that I had put all of my eggs in this basket, and when it started to, be rough, it was an empty basket, and I needed another basket. I needed another basket with eggs in it. And so that's one of the things that I recommend to anybody is find people in your life who like you for you, and where in those relationships you can talk about your business because it's such a big part of your life, but where they like you for you separate from it, and where that's a very strong feeling that you get, because there will be times when you need validation for a different part of your life, and that will give you strength to keep doing the business. But you need to value yourself and have other people who also celebrate you as you.
Yeah, that's important also to stay grounded in that, right? To understand that the end of the world is not necessarily the closing of your business.
It's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah. That's kind of weirdly empowering too, when you get to that place and get through it. You're like, oh, all right, I can do that. It's liberating in a sense. And I would say on the business side, I struggled with 2 things at that time that I've since completely reframed personally. One was that we hadn't raised all that much money. We were essentially operating as a consultancy, and so month to month we had cash flow positive months. So we were able to get by, and we were hanging out with a lot of VC funded startups who were talking about the 6, 7, 8, no, not usually 8, but 6 or 7 figures that they had raised at that point. And so I felt ashamed of how little money we'd raised, and I also felt ashamed of being wrong about getting to that place where we realized what we had thought would work out didn't work out. And within the few months where we made that decision and committed to a new direction, and then I think it was 3 or 4 months before we started talking to investors about raising money for that, I completely shifted my thinking in that. And I started to be really proud of how little money we'd raised and how much we'd done with it. And also, and this one took even longer, but eventually started to be proud that we'd realized we were wrong and changed direction and saw that as an asset rather than a weakness. And that did take a very long time and some very stern mentorship from some people around me to stop sort of, hunkering in when I told that story and to say, hey, we actually learned and we're changing because of it and we're stronger for it, and this is why we're a good bet now because we've learned those lessons.
Yeah, and you should at least, it's easy to say sitting over here, but you should say as a badge of courage that you didn't raise money, right? That you pay, we're here sitting here talking to you and we haven't raised a penny, or we raised $100,000 or whatever the number is, right? It's still a big deal, and to turn that around, it's actually quite important because it does validate who you are, because you've made it through all the crap to get there. Right?
Super scrappy.
super scrappy. So tell us about the raising of money and how much fun it is and how easy it is, and especially as a woman.
So I'd actually say it's become more fun. I think it's become more fun as we've had a better story to tell and we know a little bit more what we're doing. However, it's also, so I do most of the investor pitching, and I learned so much from it, and I'm so humbled by it, and it's emotionally exhausting because you're constantly, when it's your company, and I'm sure a lot of you in the room know this, it's an extension of you. And so you're putting yourself out there in the room, and it's getting torn apart time and time again. And it has gotten a little easier over time. I don't take it as personally, but every once in a while, there's a comment that just cuts to the core, and it's really difficult to recover in the amount. You have to go out and pitch again the next day, and you have to keep telling that story and being confident in it. And so maintaining that commitment and confidence to the business and in myself in those moments when I'm pitching is a huge challenge. And I really, really resisted I for a long time wanted to believe that my being a woman had no role whatsoever in any of this. And I still think I think it's situational. It's very dependent on who you're talking to and what their lens is. But I have had some moments where I'm like, oh, okay, this is not about the business. There have definitely been those moments now, and those are learning moments as well. And like Britta was saying earlier, now when we talk to other women founders, there's a degree of empathy, and there's a degree of solidarity and support that's there, and also troubleshooting. Coming up with just very practical, tactical kinds of things to deal with those moments that are very important. So.
Yeah. And what were the big surprises for you when you're raising money? What were the surprises just for Martina? What was like, I didn't know that. I mean, I was really surprised to hear that, or I was really surprised to get that. Or what were some big surprises? Maybe one or two that were things that you like. Well, I would have never thought that happened.
That's a great question. I think one of the big surprises, or one of the big shifts I had to make was initially we did a small friends and family round, and that was very much about us, about people believing in us and our integrity and our ability. And they said that explicitly. These were people we'd known for a while, and they said, we're investing in you because we believe you can do this. And then making the leap to when we're talking to more experienced investors who invest in a lot of businesses, when it really becomes about the business. And in a way, I was very excited for that because we were eager to move we wanted it to be about the business from day one. However, I wasn't prepared to answer all the questions about the business. I realized, that we had, especially in those first few early pitches we had a lot more planning to do, and we had a lot of things we hadn't thought through. And I think it's always a delicate balance of, I kind of had early entrepreneur bravado of, oh, well, we don't need a plan. Well, and
Business
and-
plan.
yeah, well, and I think it's a balance too. There is a degree of over planning, of course. Like you could spend way too much time planning and
You
not
don't
just
need a
doing.
60-page of planning, but
Yeah.
you need a business plan.
But you need to figure out you at least need to have that vision and figure out the steps and kind of have a cohesive narrative for how you're going to get there and who you need to get there and how much you need to get there. And especially in those early pitches, we hadn't thought through that thoroughly enough, and that was very humbling. And then I realized, I was, even though I was saying I wanted it to be about the business, I was frustrated that it wasn't enough for it to just for me to be like, but I can do it, just trust me. And so to really invest in making those plans and finding the right people to fill the knowledge gaps that we had, and continue, we're continuing to fill those. So bringing people on, product has been one that, I'm not a product person, I'm not a product expert by any means, and we have people on our team who are now, and they do a phenomenal job, and to trust them and to let go of that has been a difficult process, and to know that they're going to do a better job than I could, and I need to go out and make sure the company's resourced, and I have a different role now, and so that transition was also hard, where I had to understand, fundraising is one of my core responsibilities now, and not all of these other things that we did in the early days.
Sure. And what was your worst pitch?
Oh. Ooh, another good question. I'm trying to think. I hope it was a long time ago. I don't think it was.
So what was your worst pitch, and who was it to?
Well, I'm not going to say who. I'm not going to say who it was to, for the interest of it's a small community. But my worst pitch was it was at a private home, and it was a group of people where it was a fundamental disconnect ideologically. And it was before I'd developed as thick of skin as I have now. I think now I could have handled it better, and I wouldn't have been quite as thrown by it. But it was just, the dialogue isn't what I would consider respectful, and I wasn't braced for it, and I was alone. There were Britta, I didn't have any allies. It was like 6 people in a room and me, and I just wasn't prepared for that emotionally or intellectually, because I think now I would spar a little bit more. I have a little bit more of a backbone at this point, but at that point I was just kind of knocked down by it, and not just in that moment. Like, it took me a few days to really recover, it was an unfortunate clash that I wasn't prepared for, and I would say it was as much on the business. I don't know if it was actually as much on the business side as the emotional side. I just wasn't braced for the severity of that particular group and interaction.
Sure. And do you role play on
Oh, we getting really.
like at 12? I mean, do you do like role play for some of the investor stuff? I mean, do you bounce things off each other in that instance? How does that work?
We practice a lot. Every time I go to pitch, the pitch is always changing too. So every time before I go to pitch, we do a fair amount of practice. And now, actually, I think because I've pitched many, many times, I don't know the count anymore, but enough that I know most of the questions. Maybe not the exact question, but I know the types of questions that are going to surface, and the types of information. So I love Q&A. Like, that's my favorite part, actually, because you get to engage and really get into the nitty-gritty. And so that a lot of that has been, I don't know that we've done some things with our advisors where they'll grill us and prep us ahead of time.
Sure.
But for the most part, it's really just getting that pitch down, and then trusting that we know it, that we are the experts at Zealyst. There's no one who knows Zealyst better than we do, and that even if we don't have the precise number or the precise date or whatever the question might be, that we have the pertinent information within us because we've lived it.
Yeah. And do you guys go to pitches together?
We do sometimes.
Sure. And do you like that?
Yeah, it's even when I just sit in the back, I find the whole experience a little bit stressful and exhilarating. And if I may brag, Martina is amazing at Q&A. Not only does she love it, she excels at Q&A, and it just makes me so proud to watch her answer questions that I see from the back of the room as attacks.
Sure.
Like, I'm gonna try and trip her up. I'm gonna try and,
Curveball,
I'm gonna throw her a curveball, and I want to see her off her game. And she never gets defensive, and she never gets mean. It's always, it's beautiful. I love watching her pitch. I love watching her do Q&A.
So, what part do you, this for you, Britta, what part do you miss today that you don't get to do that you did, say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
I do miss the huddles. I do miss, I find myself meeting neat people all the time and logging them away and then rolling through, I want to introduce them to so-and-so and so-and-so. But the thing that was so great about huddles was that we could connect people in a way that where you couldn't just send an email like, Mike, you should meet so-and-so because you're both into this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
Go have coffee and tell me about the conversation you have about these 5 things I told you had in common. And with the huddles, there was more magic to it, and we really built the machine where we could trust in the magic. We could trust in the technology we had built and the games we had built, really to help people connect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just got to watch it. And so that's something that I do miss. And I do miss sort of having that social sandbox of connections.
Yeah.
Now I have to do more introductions over emails and spend a lot of time crafting it, when I think if I could just put this in a social scavenger hunt, it would be so
much
snappy.
And for you, for the foreseeable future, let's say next 12 months, do you guys know where you're gonna go? I mean, have you pretty much, do you feel pretty confident you know where you're gonna go?
We've got a good plan, and we're confident that
Cruising.
we're going there.
Okay, so you're not gonna pivot?
It's been over a year since Pivot.
Been over a year since Pivot.
There you go. Okay.
I do, this is a jiggish term, I do reserve the right to wake up smarter tomorrow.
Yes.
So I won't say that pivots are completely out of the question, but I think we've learned so much. We've learned so much about our business and so much about business that, I think we're really cruising.
So tell us, as someone that's never raised money before, there might be a few in the audience. So tell us what they should know is the most important thing when you're out raising money. And let's say they're raising money through not their friends.
Right.
Let's say they're raising money through angel investors, people that are more sophisticated than their friends. What should they know from your standpoint?
I think it's really important to cultivate a network and to both of mentors and or investors, sometimes one and the same, who can help you craft that story and refine your pitch before you're pitching. There's this saying that's pretty popular that in the startup world of ask for advice, not money. And I think opening some of those doors before you're really raising money is really important for building relationships and also for learning and building trust. And there are a handful of investors I have on speed dial now, not necessarily our investors, but just people I trust completely and can talk to when I hit some kind of unforeseen obstacle, and they'll help me talk through it. And that's priceless, having that kind of network of knowledge and support. And so I'd say long before you actually want to go out and start pitching for money in any formal capacity, start cultivating those relationships and learning as much as you can. Just be a sponge. There's so much to learn. And now I rattle off the acronyms like nobody's business, and I don't even catch myself. We were presenting to high schoolers a few weeks ago, and I was like, VC this, and cap table this, and I was just, and I didn't even, and the high school girls were like, what's a VC? And so before you know it, you're in it, and you have learned the lingo, and you know what you're talking about. But initially, it's a whole new world. It's a new terrain, and the best way, I mean, it's important to read books, and there's a lot of great information available, publicly as well. But I think learning through the people who are doing it, and both on the entrepreneur side and the investor side, is the best way to accelerate your own learning and ultimately your own success.
Yeah, I would say part of that is identifying the right people to talk to. Like, let's just say you know no one, but you can identify the right people to talk to and actually seek those people out. As you say, hey, I'm not knocking on the door, give me a check. It's like, hey, I'm working on this business, I'd love to talk to you about it, and give me your feedback.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
that, if it goes somewhere, then that's great. And if it doesn't, then maybe there's no business, at least with that person.
Yeah.
So I think that's the
And you learn something.
yeah. And
Yeah.
the beauty of it is you do learn something.
Yeah.
I mean, you're supposed to at least. So not always. What things that you wish you had done, or no, let's take it back. One thing that you wish you had done but didn't do, what is that? And it could have been early on, or it could have been late, and I don't necessarily care, but sometime in the last 4 years, you did something, and it's like, you're like, crap, we wish we would have done this instead of this, or just this. I wish we would have done this. We would have been either way further, or we would have been.
Yeah. One of the things I thought about in the last year, so I started mentoring for the Startup Next program through Up Global. And a lot of times when I'm up there as a mentor, I'm looking around, I'm like, damn, I wish we would have done this when we were starting, because these fledgling companies are so awesome, and they're just learning so much so quickly. And Startup Next didn't exist when we were starting, and we never did end up applying to Techstars. We considered it, and I'm not saying that the accelerator route is always the right route, but I do wish we plugged into, and to some extent they didn't exist. So this is a little bit of a foolhardy wish. There weren't as many things out there yet, but I would have plugged into the resources out there sooner, and started going to startup grinds and just really put ourselves out there, because we were a little bit reticent early on. It's like, oh, we're founding a business. I don't know if anyone's going to believe us, and just being bold and being very present and prominent in that world, and building that community from day one, because I think we hesitated initially, and that was lack of confidence and also lack of awareness.
I think one of the other things that's important to remember in questions like this, Mike, is that it couldn't have happened any other way. And so while there is advice that we need to give and should give to other people who are in our position that we were a few years ago, we couldn't have gotten here if we hadn't had those two previous pivots.
Yeah.
Like as soon as we landed on this model, we both sort of looked at each other and asked, why didn't we do this from day one?
Yeah.
And it's because it couldn't have, we couldn't have. We
known,
had to learn all of those pieces. And we had to build the network that we did in the first model and the second model to get to where we are now. And so I think that's important for all of us to keep in mind. I have to tell myself that very regularly.
Yeah.
Couldn't have happened any other way. Am I uncomfortable with where I am right now? Well, sometimes, yes. But overall, I would usually pick that over some kind of fantasy alternative where, I don't know, maybe I did it all right out of the gate and it's very boring or dull or nasty, or
We might not be friends anymore.
We might not be friends anymore. And I wouldn't trade that at all.
Yeah. Here's a question for the audience, a show of hands. If there was a school that you could go to that helped you understand how to start a company, would you attend that school, let's say as a weekly program, like a mini, you call it an MBA, but not an MBA because it's kind of overpriced, but I have an MBA too, so I believe me, it's sometimes not worth it. So does anyone have an interest in going to a school where you would learn things, just the mechanics of starting a company? Just raise your hand.
There's a school for a 3-day one, startup weekend.
Oh, no, not like a startup weekend. Do like maybe it's over 3 months or 6 months every week kind of thing, once a week, or like you can still have a life, meaning, and go to school.
They already exist.
Well, yeah, they do at some level. So, yeah. The school part is the thing that I always have an interest in. What we don't really know things.
But it's so fun to learn by doing it wrong.
Yes, exactly. It's so much more fun, right? We wouldn't learn it near as quickly as if, yeah.
I think the benefit of a lot of programs that do exist too is the network it plugs you into, like the mentors that are part of it, and you do learn some tangible things, and there are obviously some, more obvious takeaways, but the relationships and the confidence that builds is a really crucial part of it. So it's a non-traditional, or maybe it's the most traditional, because that's kind of going back to the way people used to learn professions with apprenticeships. And I think of it more in that way, where you're building those relationships and trust, and that knowledge exchange happens organically between people and in groups.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume that the trust between you two has increased over the years. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about how I think we're closer than a lot of married couples out there. not in all senses, but in
a daily sense of
talking about things.
Yeah.
And what your business is at some level it's successful. I mean, you're actually starting to make stuff happen, which is absolutely awesome. Are you surprised sometimes? You're like, holy crap, we're doing stuff. Do you ever think like that?
I'm totally surprised sometimes. I mean, sometimes it seems very surreal. Even just sitting up here, it's interesting how quickly things happen, because we really went into this whole thing wide-eyed, and just a lot of the people we idolized are now our friends and our peers, and we exchange advice, and having the honor of getting to talk to people who are interested in what we're doing in startups in general is really cool and totally surreal. So I think that's part of what keeps it exciting and interesting, is that it is always surprising.
So we can open up the questions now.
So I have two, Mike.
Okay,
Yeah, so who's Haiku Neat? Who's that?
right behind you.
Yeah, so go ahead. That's a great question.
What's the Zealyst elevator pitch?
what's the Zealyst elevator pitch?
No, we just reworked it. Collaborative games and innovative analytics for companies with an engagement mindset. And if we're on a really long elevator ride, I would start by saying, 70% of the global workforce is disengaged from their job, and people who are engaged are more generous with their time, more generous with their ideas, more loyal to the company, both publicly and privately, and are less likely to leave. And all of those pieces relate to dollars for those companies. And so we use data analysis and games to help connect employees to each other and to their managers. There's been a lot of research, actually a lot of it has come out of the University of Washington, around how feeling connected to your colleagues and managers does create that embeddedness, that engagement that allows you to feel loyal to your company and to inspire you to share your ideas, because in technology, this is a very big deal. If you've got a brilliant idea, you could do what we did and go do it yourself, or you could share it with your employer, and then that can become one other piece of these giant technology corporations' tools. And so our software builds those communities to make individual employees' lives better by connecting them to each other, and also all of our games collect data on the sort of the state of the culture, which then we can report back to managers scrubbed of anybody's individual data, so that they can take real-time actions to improve their culture and head off trouble spots at the pass.
It's a long elevator.
It was a long elevator.
So you're selling to HR? Is that?
Question is,
No, we are traditionally, although we're having more and more conversations with C-level leadership, because we're taking a more sort of strategic angle.
So the reason I ask is the comment you just made about maybe you're also covering like a little bit of what surveys do and things like that. So are you having to push out other vendors, because you're not making a claim of increasing revenue? So you can't
Actually, we are. So all of those wonderful factors that Britta just mentioned lead to higher productivity and ultimately higher revenue as well. And there's some great research information that very clearly illustrates that now. So it's not just sort of it's not purely a data collection play. It is actually about constantly improving those engagement numbers and ultimately making employees more productive and more heightening the ROI on a given employee base as they engage with the system.
So they're freeing up extra budget to buy you?
In some cases, actually. So yeah, and yeah, there's some intricacies to how we're marketing this, but and we're actually partnered with the University of Washington formally, so we're able to access their research and tools that they have and start to measure this in a more tangible sense. So we're doing several different studies with them right now so that we can say empirically that we are making a difference. And that's the type of data that's going to take a little bit more, but the early indications are really exciting actually, and just the early engagements we've had with customers that were already indicating a higher level of embeddedness. And so that's a predictive, sorry, this is getting technical, but it's a predictive analytic for how long employees will stay. And attrition is extremely costly, particularly in technology. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at, is decreasing attrition and improving productivity.
Jack?
Yeah, Jay Bose. Yeah, great question. I love it. What do you got?
Basically, what can entrepreneurs, specifically male entrepreneurs, do to support female entrepreneurs around us? Simple things, by the way.
What can male entrepreneurs do to help female entrepreneurs? Is that right?
Yeah.
That's an awesome question. So we actually had a panel.
Hire them.
Yes, well, that's part of it. We are on the board of Women in Tech, Seattle Women in Tech as well, and we did a male allies panel a few months ago. And one of my favorite suggestions, it's a very basic thing that everyone can do, and I think is a good starting point at least, is Dan Shapiro advised everyone to start following women on Twitter. And it's a really simple, or whatever sort of analog of that, wherever you get your news, think about where you're getting your information and where you're developing your perspective, and diversify that very intentionally, because we all fall into these patterns where we get our news sources, or we associate with people in a way that becomes very patterned, and we get our news in a very patterned kind of way, and disrupting that and being intentional about getting information from new places and associating with new people can be hugely beneficial. So that was one of my favorite tips, because you can do it tonight.
I think one of the other ones, and this also came out of that Women in Tech panel, is if you are a male founder and you have a family and you like them, talk about it. Because so often that's something that is seen as something women do. And when women have the mic, they talk about how grateful they are. I'm very grateful that my husband is here right now to support me. I'm very grateful that he supported us through starting this business. And if we had children, I would talk about how great our children were, but we don't.
I have dogs.
She's got dogs who are great, but that is something that makes women feel like they're not less when men will acknowledge their families as part of their success as well. It's something that women traditionally do. And I know I watch for it when I see men speak, and I'm so happy when I see them acknowledge their families and the role that their families play, because it's unusual.
Sure, it isn't.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's not because men don't appreciate their families. It just doesn't make it into the conversation the way it does when women have the mic.
Absolutely.
So that's something you can do. I would also say, listen to women. Don't interrupt them when they're giving their pitch. Give them the courtesy that you think you deserve. And think about that. What does that look like? Think about if you ever witness an interaction where you hear someone give a pitch and it's uncomfortable, whether that's a male entrepreneur giving a pitch or a female entrepreneur giving a pitch, and then think about what it would look like, or think about what it would feel like if you were in that position, and think about who that person is and maybe why they're being treated that way. It's not just women and men, it's the diversity in tech and diversity in perspectives. And it's important for all of us to start with being courteous to each other and listening.
Yeah. Very well put, Brenda.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Question, do you think that you would have had the same level of success that you have today if you were to start off being mothers on top of being women?
Being modest and being
Mothers.
Oh, mothers.
Who had children.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, what I feel is men and women, they pretty
Well,
much
let us
have the
answer the
same.
question though. Let's see. Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's really hard to say, not having had children. So I don't want to. I don't want to assume too much about what that experience is like. Obviously, I had some level of knowledge, but I think it would certainly be harder. I certainly think there are things. We did, and like I said, I couldn't even date, so let alone take care of a child. I don't know. I shouldn't say I couldn't even. I chose not to. Those were choices that we made early on. And I don't think kind of the stereotypical startup culture is conducive to good family life. However, I think the great thing about starting a business is you get to decide and you get to define those rules. And so I think it is very possible. And it requires different kinds of focus and intention, but I do think it's quite possible, especially if you have a supportive partner and supportive network around you to facilitate that. But in terms of comparing our success, I honestly just can't say, because there are also just a lot of dumb things we did because we were young and single, so there's a trade-off. I don't know. I think sometimes,
Sometimes dumb and single's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it worked for
Either
us. But I do think there are specific challenges that would just require a different kind of energy and focus.
Yeah.
I just have so much respect for people who choose to do the startup route and have
Kids.
have children.
Both men and women.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Both. It's tough for everyone. The work-life balance in a startup is doesn't exist. In the back, all the way in the back.
I have a question. What do you guys do for self-care?
What do you guys do for self-care?
We've gotten pretty serious about this in the last few years, actually, because we realized, shoot, if we don't take care of ourselves, then we're not very good at doing our jobs, because we realized we had just driven ourselves into a really bad place by thinking it was cool and normal to sort of neglect all the other parts of ourselves. I took a dance class. I love my weekly ballet class. It is my centering moment of the week, and I also practice meditation, not quite as regularly as my dance class. And I just find, on top of that, trying to experience the beauty in life. I love flowers. I know it's a cliche, and because it's a cliche, when I pass roses, I smell them because they're beautiful and they smell nice and it's kind of funny. And I always stop and I think, I'm stopping to smell the roses. I'm taking a break in whatever I was doing to smell the roses. And I think that's important. It's been really important for me to take those breaks and to smell the flowers.
And I would just add that developing an awareness of what those things are that feeds you, because it's different for everyone. For Britta, it's dance. For me, it's yoga and running and time with friends and loved ones. And I recently heard a great, so Rebecca Norlander, another wonderful woman founder here in Seattle, was talking about how she thinks of it. She's an athlete, and she thinks of it just in a strict sort of caloric model, and that if she doesn't get enough calories in, she doesn't have enough energy to run the race. And so she will, break down her day to the point where she's making sure she has those infusions of energy, whether it's reading a book for 10 minutes that just gives her that mental space to then head into the next meeting ready, or going for a run over lunch, or building those pieces into your day and into your life in a really intentional manner. And not something that's made it easier for me is I used to feel a sense of guilt when I took time for myself. I think, oh, I should be working. This is really indulgent. And I finally realized that it was an investment in the business, and that if I wasn't sleeping, if I wasn't healthy, I was a crappy leader, and I was a crappy representation of what our business could be. And I really flipped that around and have started enjoying my recreation time, because I think of it as an investment in the time that I work. And that helped completely shift my thinking in that.
Yeah, I would say, I asked the work-life balance question almost to every person who sits in that chair. And what I hear most of the time is, it doesn't exist, we don't really have it, but it's important to take an hour or an hour and a half every so often. Maybe it's not every day, maybe it's every third day, but take that time. And for me, I like to play basketball and I love to ride my bike. And so those things, if I do those things, and I can do those every few days, it totally makes me a better human being. I mean, I'm much more friendly to be around. I'm all the things that people like about me. And you as founders need to understand that you can work 12, 16 hours a day. That's totally cool. But take an hour, take 90 minutes, take 45 minutes somewhere every couple days and do things you really love to do, because it's going to make you a better leader, and it's going to make you a better person, it's going to make you a better employee, and God damn, you'll have a much better time, right? So
yes.
That's constant from founders that are just buried in it, right? You just get buried in it. So one last question, and then we'll get off the stage and we can sit around and hang out. So one last question, all the way in the back.
I think it's you.
It's you.
That's you. You, my friend.
Yep.
As co-founders, I'm sure you guys wear very different hats. How do you guys decide to divide your responsibilities for the business?
Yeah, how did you decide who does what? How did you decide that you were going to do investor pitches and you weren't? How did you decide those things?
A lot of it was out of necessity, and just, especially in the early days, just triaging, okay, how much can you handle, and back and forth, and our roles evolved out of that. And now now that we have more of a team and we actually can focus a bit more, we've spent more time thinking about that, and not only thinking about where we are today and what our responsibilities are today and how that plays into the rest of the team, but where we want to go. And Britta, maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about how your role is sort of evolving, but a lot of those pieces are dynamic, especially as the company grows, and that we're trying to put our hats on other people and start to let everyone focus on what they do best and what they love, and where we can shine and work together. And it sounds a little kumbaya, but I think it's really important, especially once you have that well-oiled machine up and running is to let go of some of the responsibilities you used to have and spend more time devoted to the things that are most important to get done. It's kind of that big rock, little rock analogy people talk about too, where you can really focus on the big important rocks and not get bogged down with all the little tedious tasks that sometimes take up so much of our time.
I would just add to that I think it depends on your business and it depends on your company's values. So for our company, people and valuing people have always been really, really important to us. And so as soon as we brought on other people, it really became about honoring and celebrating and figuring out what everybody we were bringing into the fold had that was special, and how we could develop and celebrate everybody to be the best version of themselves that they can, both personally and professionally, because it's such a good investment from our end. So I think it often has to do with natural skills, and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes you got to do the things that you don't really want to do. But it's a process. And I'm happy to talk with you more about that after.
So one last question, just one. Here it is, COVID, just one last question. What's your exit strategy?
What's your exit strategy?
Sure.
So we've always had the philosophy that if we build a great company and we're really performing in the market and we get noticed, that we'll attract the attention of companies who might want to be a part of that. And that's already, proving to be true to some extent. And so we're really focused on maximizing our reach and our efficacy, and I'm very confident, more confident by the day actually, which is exciting, that will attract the right opportunity for exit when it's right. And something we're really committed to is waiting for when it's right, both for our investors and our company. We've already recognized that there are certain companies that probably wouldn't be a good fit, wouldn't be a good place for Zealyst to live, and are starting to develop a better sense of what would be. And so it's a fun process of just building a really great company and then trusting that that's going to attract the attention of the people we want to work with.
So first, thank you to the sponsors for letting us sit up here for an hour, a few minutes. Thanks for the ambassadors to helping make all of our jobs easier. But most of all, thanks to Britta and Martina for being here. Thank you very much.